privileged, honored, and just beyond entertained by the conversations that I get to have with Walt over the years. I've been really fortunate. I think a lot of you know Walt, some of you may not, especially some of you may be newer to, I feel so weird, of all people needing a mic, right? Catherine will have to keep reminding me, keep signaling me so that we can do it for the recording. But for those of you who don't, Walt was a principal technology columnist at the Wall Street Journal from 1991 to 2013, and also was the co-founder of Recode and All Things Digital and the conferences that spawned from that. And I had the really good fortune, shortly after Walt wrote an article calling telephone carriers the new Soviet ministries, of being a representative of the telephone carriers going to talk to him for the very first time. And all throughout my technology career, I would tell you that getting an audience with Walt was really kind of a career milestone for people. And I started in technology in '95, and so by '95, you'd already had that column for 4 years, and all I could see was all the CEOs that I worked for trying to clamor to get time with Walt. And part of the reason is that Walt could make or break your product and as well as your stock, right? And people would actually calculate, your PR team could tell you how much impact it would be if you had a good Walt meeting. And so knowing that he had already prefaced our first interaction with the idea that the person I worked for was running a Soviet ministry, it was a little bit daunting to go in there. And yet nonetheless, 10 years later, we're sitting here together, and at Walt's gracious offer has come here to share some of the great insights and stories that I've been benefiting from through our friendship over the years. I want to start like we do all the time, Walt, because this is kind of a Catherine thing, and it's been true since we've hired as many people as we have. We start with personal questions. And so I warned you about this.
Yeah, you did, yeah.
I did warn you about this.
I'm happy about it.
And I have, I know you're not, but I have at least taken the high road and not done the boxers and brief questions that Barry always asks me to ask. So I'm just not going to do it. Right, but I'm just not going to do it. I prefer not to actually have that picture in my head. So I want to ask you to start with, because this is, I think, one of the most fun things that we talk about. What has been your favorite show to binge watch?
What has been my favorite show to, boy, there are so many. There really are so many. I mean, you know, more recently it's been Game of Thrones. It's even more recently, I don't know how many of you have seen this. It's a show that is a throwback to the 50s called The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It's on Amazon, which I didn't know if I would like, but it turned out to be terrific. I mean, you know.
All right, so we'll move to the next one. That's great. Those are good. Last book read.
Oh, the Michael Wolff book on Trump. I'm now in the middle of something completely different, but that was the last book I finished. And I know him a little, and he's written about me a little, and I don't trust him 100%, but it was interesting.
Vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry?
Chocolate.
Awesome. Tell us about your first job.
Oh, I was a stock boy and cashier at a supermarket, and I had to join the Meat Cutters and Butcher Workmen's Union, but that was good because they got me more than minimum wage.
Awesome.
That was
so
good.
you're in the union?
I was in the union.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Favorite vacation destination?
Italy, almost anywhere in Italy. But we particularly love Verona.
Oh.
How many people have been to Verona? The rest of you have made a terrible mistake. It's near Venice, and it used to be run by Venice, and it's just a beautiful little city.
Okay, this is going to be the hardest question I'm going to ask you.
Yeah, okay.
You have to pick one. Red Sox or Patriots?
I think I still have to say Red Sox. You know, for most of my lifetime, anybody here who's from New England would know this. The Red Sox never won. Now they've won a bunch. But the Patriots were worse because No one went to their games. No one talked about them. No one followed them. They were, these people that hate the Patriots for being like the Yankees, too dominant and all that, have to realize that before around 2000, they were nothing. They're nothing. They never even got into the playoffs. So this is all a very new phenomenon. But I'm very worried about Tom Brady's throwing hand right now. It's my biggest single worry.
It is.
After listening, I had dinner last night and I got back to the hotel and I read 5 stories about it. That's very
Are you lose some sleep?
I lost it.
And the other part about this Tom Brady story that I have to share is, as we were driving in last night, he said, "What's with 12? You guys don't have any players that are 12. All I can think about is Tom Brady."
Well, if you say 12 in football, to me, that's terrific, Tom, but she explained it. So.
Yeah, explain, we branded it now, so it's okay. So this question
You just don't want to ever pass at the goal line when you have. Just don't ever.
Really necessary. Really?
It's not the players, great player. It just was terrible coaches.
And you'll be happy to know that gentleman is no longer employed.
I do know that.
And he's found a job, hopefully, with our kicker, who we've also
Yes.
decided to a new home. So this question actually came up a lot, and this will sort of transition us into the rest of the conversations that we're gonna have. But the team really, in looking at your illustrious career, and more importantly, the conferences that you've run.
Stop with the illustrious stuff.
I'm just saying. The conferences that you run, you've got to have an amazing amount of conversations with some incredibly interesting and iconic technology folks. The 2 questions I have for you on this topic, and I'm always interested because I think each conference you might change your answer, because I think every conference gets even more interesting from my perspective as an audience member, but who's the most interesting interview, not the most interesting person, but the most interesting interview that you did? And what made that an interesting interview for you?
Well, there's a whole lot of them that are just sort of, sometimes there are dud interviews. It could be that you're not on your game, but often it's just that the person, as successful as they are in their field, isn't necessarily relaxed enough on stage to really show a little of themselves and give their thoughts. Most of the interviews are good. Some of the interviews are great. The most interesting interview, I think, just recently, it's hard for me to think back to the ones in 2003. The most interesting, the best one, the most memorable one was when we had Bill Gates and Steve Jobs together, and that went on for an hour and a half. And all the interviews are unrehearsed, and that people were, I'm not making this up, people were on their feet and in tears at the end of that interview, because our audience is a tech audience, and this was like, these were 2 gods who were also rivals, who were had been on stage. But I had, I would say the most recent, the very most interesting interview was one I did with Jeff Bezos year before last, so 2016, and it was great.
What was that?
Because it ranged over a whole bunch of things.
Not just around Amazon.
And for Jeff, I don't want to, you have to forgive me if I say things like I'm about to say, because I'm not trying to brag. It's just that I was the tech columnist at the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal was both the biggest circulation and the most elite, wealthy, influential readership at the very same time for many of the years I did this. And so I had entree to a lot of these people, not because I'm a good guy. It was to their benefit. And so I've known Jeff for a long time. I've known Jeff since he started at Amazon. Even a little bit before. And he's been very hard he was very hard for my partner Kara Swisher and I to get to our conference. Harder than Gates, harder than Steve Jobs, harder than Larry Ellison, harder than, Sergey and Larry.
Why? What was his?
He just had a thing. I think that he and his team believed that the only time, that moment that made sense for them was when they had something big and pivotal to announce, and we were trying to explain that's not really what our conference is. We're happy to do that. I mean, you know, the Microsoft
That's not what people come
and
there
show
for.
the new versions of Windows there first, and Jobs actually showed a few things there first. But anyway, so we got Jeff to come in 2016, and what made it interesting was he talked about Amazon's core business. He talked about, we talked a lot about AI and voice, because the Echo was pretty new at the time. He revealed how many people were working on it. He also revealed how crude all of this stuff was, and how early it was, and how it's a 10-year thing, really. But he talked about space. We had Elon Musk at the same
That's right,
conference.
that's right.
And Elon Musk was like doing crazy talk. I mean, crazy talk. He was.
But they weren't on at the same time. They just
No,
did
but
the-
but people love both interviews. But I mean, Elon, I did, Jeff I did myself, and Elon I did with Kara, and Elon just said things like, somebody stood up in the audience in the Q&A portion and said, what do you think? Are we really just not really, we're not real, we're just part of a computer simulation for a superior alien race? And he said, I think that's right. You know, so, that's not, Jeff doesn't say stuff like that. But Jeff also was, he took on Trump. Trump had publicly attacked Amazon, threatened them with antitrust or some other kind of legal thing, made some ludicrous claim that the Washington Post was a tax dodge for Amazon, when, as most of you know, he owns the Washington Post. Amazon doesn't own the Washington Post. But, and so he actually said some political things. So it was a really interesting interview.
That's cool. Shifting, we had this conversation a little bit last night, but I'm really fascinated when we look back at some of the tech losses that we had this year. And one of the ones I want to talk to you about is AOL, because back in the day, right, when you were sort of building the base of your audience and the way that you were telling your story about ease of use and how consumers and customers, right, really need to see technology versus how technologists see technology, you were an advocate of AOL, right?
I was the first advocate of AOL, on the national level at least, maybe the first journalist on any level. Have always been based in DC, and the reason I was always based in DC, even though my bosses wanted me to move to Palo Alto when I started the tech column. First of all, you have to understand, I was 44 years old when I did this, and if I can give a little career lesson, it's always reinvent yourself. I'm sorry if this runs counter to what you want them to do.
I'm drinking.
I think you have to reinvent yourself, and I think you have to be entrepreneurial in your work. And
I reinvented myself, that's what.
you have, and I've been on the phone with you a few times during that. But here's the thing, you can be entrepreneurial and reinvent yourself without quitting your company. You can make up new things for yourself, for you to do, and sell it to your bosses, and do these things. And so I was 44 years old, and I was the chief national security correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, and I had just finished covering the collapse of communism and all this stuff, and I decided, but for 10 years I had been a computer hobbyist, so I decided it was way too hard. It was way too hard to figure out how to use these computers, and that I could be doing a public service and something I enjoyed, and something that would be good for the business of the journal, to turn the typical technology column on its head, champion users, criticize the industry. So that was my deal. And less than a year, I think, after I started it, I started getting these phone calls from this AOL company. Now, I actually wasn't using AOL, but it never occurred to me to write about them. And this woman, this PR woman, very formidable person who I adore, is a friend of mine now. Her name is Jean Case, Steve Case's wife. They weren't married then. She just kept calling me, saying it's a half-hour drive. We're out in Northern Virginia. And they were in an industrial park behind a Cadillac dealer. And come out here, could meet Steve, you know. So I did it, and I decided to do a big comparison of all my online services. At the time, they had 200,000 members, and remember, there was no web. This is before the web. And the big competitors were Prodigy. Some of you are too young to know this. Prodigy and CompuServe. They each had about 2 million. And really, that was it. There were some like bulletin boards and Usenet and things like that. And so AOL was, really tiny. And I wrote this column saying, "This is the future. This is the one you want to be on." And I later found out that they used that to raise a bunch of money, stuff like that. I got none.
So knowing all that, in the last year, right, we lost AOL IM finally, and
AIM, yeah.
right, and obviously what was AOL is now Verizon, and in other ways, right? So what do you make of that arc, right? Like the arc from what it was and where technology went and where we are today, that the remnants of AOL are where they are.
Well, I think the web was really what did them in. I mean, to their...
Not mobile? You don't think mobile was a real last straw?
Yeah, but first the web. Because remember, when the web came, mobile wasn't really fully... The web arrived in the mid-90s, and mobile didn't really become a thing of consequence until the iPhone in 2007. Yeah? I know, yeah. I mean, there were mobile phones, but it wasn't a thing of consequence. And so...
You just don't think there was, they adjusted enough?
No, they did. They adjusted pretty quickly. But it was, why go through AOL to get to the web when you could just get to the web through Netscape? I mean, ironically, of course, they bought Netscape eventually. They bought CompuServe. They actually bought a browser very early called BookLinks or something. It was made in Massachusetts. And they built into their structure things you could click on, which didn't take you to an internal AOL page, but to a web page. But it just wasn't enough. There still are a few million people who use it for internet access today. A dial-up. There still are.
So, but AOL, Yahoo, right? They aren't what they were in the heyday, and they've now moved to other companies that are actually carriers, right? And cable providers and ISPs.
What? You want to know what I think about that?
You know where I'm going, but
I think it's a disaster. I don't think we should be combining distribution and content. I don't think that the current FCC is doing anything for the public interest. I think they're doing...
So net neutrality in this...
Yeah, the rollback of net neutrality is a horrible thing.
In combination with this, right?
Yeah, well, but it's part and parcel of it. They did it at why did they do it? Do you think they did it out of principle? No, they did it because Verizon and AT&T lobbied. I mean, the chairman of the FCC used to work for Verizon. Well, what are we talking about here? I mean, and so the Soviet ministries thing had a meaning, and it meant that in a market system, which has a lot of flaws, among the positives in a market system is at the very least, there's a feedback loop between the consumer of a service or a product and the maker of a service and a product. Could be a retail experience like at Best Buy, or could be, a Samsung phone or I don't know, whoever makes this microphone. And the point is that the carriers put themselves in the middle. They separated you from a relationship with the handset maker. Except for Apple, because Steve Jobs was Steve Jobs, and he had a bigger brand than Singular, which became AT&T. And so he forced a deal where they couldn't even put branding on the phone, even in the software. I mean, they didn't even see the phone when they signed up to be the exclusive carrier. You know that story.
Yeah.
They just saw a sketch of it. That was it. They had never had any input into it. None. And I don't think any carrier should have any input into any device that runs on their network. I have never met an industry, ever, you and I used to talk about this all the time, I have never met an industry so unhappy to be in the very lucrative business it's in as the wireless carriers. They're in a very lucrative business. I know it's CapEx heavy, but they've done all this investment in these networks. We all rely on them, way more even than when I wrote those columns about Soviet ministry. And yet they're so unhappy to be in that business. I don't know why they just don't stay in their lane and keep collecting those giant margins.
I tried to convince you. I tried really hard for like a year and a half to convince you.
Yeah, but you didn't have the John Ledger
Yeah.
shtick down.
Exactly.
He has an amazing shtick, which he actually has said off stage at when he was at one of our conferences, is a shtick. He kind of admitted it, but
He built a brand around himself.
Uncarrier and
Yeah.
look at me and my sneakers, whatever, and but.
And my foul Twitter language.
And they've also done some good things, which I give them credit for. I'm very worried about zero rating. It may sound great to get Netflix free, but what about the next Netflix that comes along that isn't free on TV?
So what you're basically saying is talking about the impact on innovation that this
Yeah.
death of net neutrality will create,
Yeah.
right? And that's the biggest loss.
But
in
even
right?
before the death of net neutrality, I repeat what I said, I have never seen an industry so unhappy to be in the business they're in, even though the business is very profitable. And it's an oligopoly, and there's only 4 of them. And T-Mobile has really come up in the world, but Sprint is just sitting there like a dead dog. And but there is for.
But nobody wants to buy them. So where are they gonna go?
I know people want to buy them. There was a merger with T-Mobile on the table, and the government squashed it.
Right, so with no one to buy them, who's?
I have no idea where they're going to go. I haven't talked to.
Do you think they'll go the way of AOL? I mean, do you think ultimately they will be a
I mean,
carrier
it's
we'll
possible.
remember?
It's possible, but it's quite. They still have a lot of valuable spectrum. So it'd be a spectrum sell-off, I guess.
So, thinking about some of the surprises in tech in the last year, what are some of the things that you heard early on and you thought, I don't think this is gonna be a thing, and then turned into a thing, and you're surprised by the adoption or the acceptance of it?
I think look, there's only been in the last. So here are the big, to me, the big moments. There've been a zillion tech products, but the big moments were personal computer, which is 1977, the web, which is mid-90s, the smartphone, which is 2007, 2008. There were things called smartphones before, they weren't smart, and believe me, I carried a Trio. I adored the Trio. I was Palm's entire marketing department. Reprinting my columns were their entire marketing materials. I'm not kidding. You
I
could go
think
to
you
the.
kept that company alive a lot longer.
Yeah, and it was a good phone, and Palm Pilot was great too. But I put the smartphone in 2007, closely followed a year later by Android. So 2007, 2008. Then we had the tablet, the iPad, which you may think doesn't matter, but you got to remember that it was the fastest adopted consumer electronics product in history and remains so. Faster adopted than the DVD player, faster adopted than anything. And they've sold over 300 million of them. And if it's Apple, that doesn't sound like a lot compared to the iPhone. But if you took the iPad out, it would be a Fortune 500 company. By the way, who can guess what the annual revenue is of the Mac, which is now a footnote essentially at Apple? But who can guess what it is? Anybody? Come on, throw out a number.
12 million.
Okay, 12 million. You don't mean million, right? You mean billion, right?
You said throw out a number.
Give that guy a raise. Hold his ground. It's 24 or 5 billion. It would be about if the Mac were a separate company, it would be about 145 or 150 on the Fortune 500 by itself. And it's you know, a single-digit percentage of Apple's business.
So what?
Oh, so,
Yeah,
I
what's
want to
surprising?
answer your
Yeah.
question. So, the next big, the latest kind of big, there have been two latest big things. One has gotten generated much more excitement than the other. The Echo, and its imitator, the Google Home. Now there are many Echoes. I still have to figure out who on Dave Limp's staff thought it was a great idea to make one with a camera designed for your bedroom. But they have one. And the Apple Watch. And people forget about the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch is actually, to answer your question, for me personally, I was surprised that it has actually succeeded. Now, succeeded is a relative term. It would not be a Fortune 500 company, but it is the biggest selling watch, not just smartwatch, in the world in just however, 2 or 3 years. And it's profitable, because nothing's not profitable at Apple. And it's, you know, it's selling at a steady clip. I had grave doubts about that. So that's been my biggest surprise. The Echo isn't a surprise to me. What's a surprise to me, and we will talk more about it, is how misunderstood, in my opinion, it is, particularly by my friends in the media. Well, people think it's the second coming, and that it has changed the world, and it hasn't changed the world at all.
And what is your biggest resistance to believing that it is as disruptive as you're hearing others? What is the obstacle for you?
So I think we are on a path to what I call ambient computing, where AI and machine learning and voice as an employee, and growth in sensors and a whole bunch of things are going to cause us to not even, my last column was called The Disappearing Computer, and in it I introduced this term ambient computing, because I think the room is going to be your computer. I think this expensive carpet on the floor and the ceiling and the walls and the chairs and the table are all going to have sensors. They're all going to be connected. They're all going to have
So what value though?
Some of them will have, well, for instance, this room was empty when you showed it to me an hour ago. I don't know what the temperature was in the room, but if the room was smart, it would have a certain temperature. Now it's full of bodies generating heat. And so without any Nest device or anything, the room would take care of its own temperature and would know how many people were in here. And when people start screaming out because I'm boring, it will change the temperature again. That kind of thing. Or the acoustics.
Or would be able to just zap the person.
Those hardworking folks trying to get Minnesota to be able to see this on video, it just might happen. It just might be built into the
What's the risk of
structure of
this
the
though?
building.
It sounds like
there's enormous risk,
Yeah.
but let me get to the Echo for a second. So I think if I'm right, and by the way, I'm talking a 10-year to 20-year time frame for this. Some of it will happen in 10 years. Most of it will happen in 20 years, I think. The Echo will be super important as the first really crude start of it. What I object to is the typical hype and hysteria in the tech media and the tech companies and Wall Street about the Echo. The Echo does effectively, in the flow of people's lives, about 3 things. And that's all people use it for. They use it to play music, they use it to set timers, they use it to ask the weather, maybe 4 things. Sometimes they ask it for a newscast. That's it. There are a million, I don't know what the number is now, but hundreds of thousands or whatever of apps that run those apps that you all know, because I know a lot, well, you're all very familiar with it, are called skills. The usage of those skills, including the best price skill, I suspect, is tiny. And the reason it's tiny is it's a voice control device. We're just figuring that, first of all, it has to be good at understanding your command. And it's pretty good. It's better than Siri, but that's a low bar. I mean, it's, if you really try to use the Echo with your voice to find out a lot of stuff, it fails a whole lot. Give you a simple example. If you want to hear a song, and you can't, for a lot of songs that have, particularly songs that have been covered a lot, if you say, I want to hear, like you name a Beatles song, remember I'm an old guy, I want to hear a Beatles song, and I say it, I might get the Beatles version, I might get a version by somebody I've never heard of and don't want to listen to, because it won't even listen to you long enough, like it'll cut you off before you can explain what you want. So it's not smart. It's not as smart as it needs to be. And I mean, for an authority in this, I'll quote Jeff Bezos, who said to me about, less than 2 years ago, I said, are we in the first inning of this? He said, no. We're in the first batter of the first inning. This is really early. So if I'm right that this is where we're heading, the Echo will be looked at as the historical start of this. But today, in our world today, I don't know how many they've sold because they never say, but I figure, my best guess is that total, they've sold, in total, since it came out, what, 2 years ago, it's sold about what Apple sells in iPhones in a good quarter. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's, I just think it's overhyped. So I'm more surprised that the Apple Watch has done better, even though it's sold fewer than the Echo, and it's probably less. Well, I don't know. I mean, Apple wearables are also a super important part of the MBA.
So going back to the voice assistant conversation we had, and I told you today, I was reading an article on Wired about the Facebook Messenger chatbots being dead and the death of virtual assistants, and it seemed like you really sort of subscribed to the idea that the voice assistant, just for the voice assistant, isn't the thing.
Yeah, voice is just the input, and I know there's some of you that are working hard on this, so you know more about it than I do, probably in the technical sense, but I've always focused on the user experience. That's really mostly what I care about. I used to have a saying in the days of when software came in boxes, and yes, there was such a thing, that if the box listed 112 features, and you could only figure out 11 of them in the first 30 minutes, then the product had 11 features. And that was it. Just had whatever, because after 30 minutes, you weren't going to bother with it. I mean, you got the core 11 features, and that's what you used. And so, voice is it is like typing, and it's a surface user control system, and it's fine. It's great. There are people, who are licensing just voice and don't even have and a little bit of natural language processing, but don't have the AI part at all and aren't interested in it for their product. So people get very confused about, not you, but average people get confused about voice, including, sadly, some journalists get confused about voice versus natural language processing versus AI versus ecosystems around these things. And in the case of the Echo, it has been a living demonstration of the limitations, at least currently, of voice as an input mechanism. I think it's actually partly why they've been bringing out ones with screens, because their biggest problem right now with Alexa is that people don't use the skills, and that voice does not provide you, it's like a bad IVR when you're calling in for customer support. You can't remember the trigger words for more than a couple of skills, and you probably forget those pretty quickly too. So, for instance, I was talking to somebody at Sonos. You probably know that Sonos now is a speaker with Alexa in it and microphones, and I said, well, why has it taken you so long? And they said, well, one reason was we didn't want to be a skill. We wanted to be, and I can't remember, I'm going to now use a phrase that some of you probably know what it is, and I don't, I mean, I know what it means, but I'm probably going to get it wrong. It's either 1P or P1. It's a term at Amazon for being on the top. It's a top level thing. So Sonos wanted you to be able to say in the Alexa app, when I ask for music, play it through the Sonos. That is using Alexa. Don't play it through the speakers on the Echo. They didn't want you to have to say, Alexa, open Sesame Sonos, or whatever the phrase would be, to get the thing played through the Sonos. And they wanted them to be able to be the default for music if you owned one and that's what you wanted. And the reason for that is that people don't voice, it has limitations.
And just to the point, we were on the phone and you were telling me the story and what was happening in your house at the time.
Oh, my Alexa kept going on. My Echo kept going on.
He kept telling me, he kept talking to me about the Alexa, and then in the house, the Alexa would say something, he was like, wait, I gotta talk to Alexa, to tell her to shut up.
Right, but here's the thing. So I think, it will be solved, but it's not solved yet. And so I don't think Alexa has changed the world. I don't think Echo has changed the world. I don't. But I think some of the concepts embedded in it will change the world. I mean, these people, you can already see the hype about HomePod. Let me tell you something. I've seen the HomePod. I've listened to it. How many of you have? It's a fantastic speaker. It actually sounded better to me than any Sonos speaker I've ever heard. They were working on it for 5 years, and it didn't have Siri in it, or it had Siri just for music. That was it. And when Echo and Google Home came out, they delayed it, then they delayed it again because they've got to build that stuff into it now. And the people that were designing it just as a sort of Sonos competitor, because Apple's always been big on music, as you know.
Well, they remember that speaker they tried to make back when I worked there?
They made
it. Was like
it.
that. It looked like a lunchbox, right?
Right.
And they hired all those.
But it
people.
had an iPod dock,
Yeah.
and that was the idea. It was an iPod accessory that was huge and expensive, and it actually sounded pretty good.
We sold like 50 of them.
Yeah, they sold 50 of them, and they stopped selling them. But so that's what this was supposed to be. We'll see, but when I read these things about how Apple's going to get in the game with this, it's going to be huge. First of all, Siri needs a lot of work, and secondly, this thing is being like rapidly patched to be a kind of Echo competitor, and maybe they'll pull off a great thing, and I'll think it's great. But I'm very skeptical about it. So all I'm trying to say is there's a short run, which is what everyone in tech always looks at. And there's a long run. I'm a big believer in the long run. I'm very skeptical about the short run. I don't think the Amazon Echo has changed the lives of many people. And in fact, it's very much like all these fitness bands people bought and that are sitting in a drawer. People use it less and less, and they use it for fewer and fewer things.
So we talked about the ambient computing and sensors and the voice assistants, and I think there was a period of time where you also expressed a similar skepticism about how smart my home needs to be.
Oh, well, that's a hot mess. I mean, I know it matters to Best Buy, and I know that some of you are working on it, but I mean, it's a joke.
So
it's a ridiculous. First of all, the stuff doesn't talk to each other, right?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't talk to each other, and I'm friends with a guy named Alex Hawkinson who did Smart Things, and who now sold his company to Samsung. I think he's still working there. He used to live about a mile from me, and I went to his house, and it was all wired up. And in his house, you could say, it's morning, or some words like that. And it would do 100 things related to its morning. It would open the blinds. It would, I don't know, make oatmeal. It would do everything, it would wake up the baby and change the diaper. It would do the whole thing. And I don't know how many thousands of hours Alex and his team spent making that house do that. And he had a hub, and he said to me, I want to get rid of this hub, but I have to have this hub now because I have to have Zigbee, Z-Wave, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and, I don't know, DC electricity, everything you could think of had to be in that hub, running water, whatever. But his house is not what anybody who buys this stuff winds up with. So it's a hot mess. And all the great claims about the smart home starting 5, 6, 7 years ago have proved to be false. Nobody's buying this. They buy maybe one thing, maybe they buy a Ring doorbell, but they don't get to the app fast enough to figure out who's at the door.
We just installed one at my house, and
She has it hurt.
my husband is completely flummoxed about why the time it takes to get it out of his pocket and turn it on, actually the ring stops, and then he doesn't see it.
But can I just tell you, that's a great example of why ambient computing is the moment when all this stuff gets put together. Because the real scenario for that doorbell, it's a great idea to have a doorbell that has a microphone and a camera in it, right? It's a great idea to have a doorbell that you don't just depend on a ding that can be heard through the house. In my house, there are rooms where we can't hear the doorbell, even if we were younger and had better hearing. I mean, you just can't hear the doorbell in certain parts of the house. But the ambient computing, now what I'm about to say may sound nutso and science fiction-y, but I honest to God believe this. Somebody will ring the doorbell will have a camera and a microphone in it. You'll be sitting in some room somewhere in your house, and when that happens, if you permit it, if you want it, what will happen is you'll hear the doorbell, you'll hear the voice, and you'll get a hologram of the person standing outside. I'm not making this up. And there are people doing holograms right now. AR, so it's AI, it's AR, it's smart home, all built into one. You'll hear their voice without there being a physical speaker, because the walls will have the ability to act like a speaker. You'll hear their voice, you'll see the hologram. You won't have to reach in your pocket to get the device out of your pocket, which is her husband, who is a great guy, by the way. It's his problem. And I don't know about any of you who put your phones in your pockets, but haven't you had situations where you haven't been able to get out of your pocket fast enough to do so? So it happens. And if you keep it in a purse, that could be even worse, depending on whether it has a special pocket for the phone or whatever.
What are they?
I call my wife, I get no response. I text her, and it's not because she's mad at me. Sometimes that happens, but it's because she doesn't hear. It's in her purse with a bunch of other stuff, and it muffles the sound, and she doesn't hear it. And she has excellent hearing. I mean, to my chagrin, she has excellent hearing. And you know my wife.
Yeah.
And
And she also doesn't like your voice assistant.
Oh, yeah. And she's way smarter than me. Am I right?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so.
Since you said it, yeah.
And so, on the voice assistant.
She doesn't even like that.
So I put the Echo. So when I was a reviewer I've been retired 5 months, so I'm an expert on retirement now. And but when I was doing these reviews, my last place was The Verge. I don't know how many of you read it. It's part of Vox Media. I was doing my columns were appearing in The Verge and Recode simultaneously. I got all these products free. I got the first Android phone from you or Andy Rubin, or both of you.
I was named after him.
I guess I got it from him. It was really a beautiful product. And but I get all these free, and then some of them I decide to buy. So I bought the Echo, because I thought, well, this is kind of a sign of the future. We ought to try this in our house. And I put it in the kitchen. And my wife said to me, is this thing listening to us all the time? I go, no, it's just listening for the trigger word. And she says, well, what does that mean? And I said, Alexa, or you could change it to, I think you could change it to Amazon. And when it hears that, then it listens to what you want. And then she said, well, do they keep that part? I said, well, yeah, they keep it because they want to get better at recognizing what you want them to do and all that. So she started going over and I said, but there's a mute button on it. So she started going over and hitting the mute button. And the ring turns red, And that lasted for a few weeks. And then one day we're sitting having breakfast and she looks at me and says, how do I know that's really muted? I don't trust them in the first place. They could turn that thing red and still be listening to everything. And I said, yeah, that's true. I said, all I can tell you is our experience over many years using Amazon to buy things has been very good. They've been very trustworthy. As far as I know, they've never had a data breach that's affected us, or they've never sold our data, or they take things back, polite, all that. I think they've earned a certain degree of trust. She goes, no, get it out of the kitchen. So when I was talking to Leslie, I was in, we have a little family room that we've turned into sort of a library. We built a bunch of bookshelves. And the Alexa sits on one of those shelves and is only used to play music while I'm in there. And I just happen to be in there on the phone.
And though as you think about like you said, the privacy issues you talk about, what happens with sensors, right? You didn't see the red light that sensors. What happens in the ambient computing
Yeah,
world,
the whole
right?
ambient, I'm not saying there won't be any red lights that go on in your house. But
it
here's the
has
thing.
to listen all the time.
In that
to do
same column, and I'm writing a book now, and I'm going to be talking about some of this in there. When I talked about ambient computing, I also talked, and I believe this, about the need, finally in this country, for actual laws dealing with security and privacy in tech. And I actually wrote a different column sometime in the last year, 18 months, which you can find if you really want to find it. I think it's called A Plan to Save the Internet or something. And it basically, it said, rather than have these crazy ping pong situations where whichever party's in power applies a law written in 1930 for the telephone monopoly to the internet for net neutrality and other laws for other aspects of the internet in these old agencies that were never conceived for the current world, we really ought to pass a statute, not a 1,200-page statute, not a micromanaging thing, but a thing that sets out fundamental principles, people's rights to their personal property, to their personal information, whatever, a bunch of principles, and create a specialized court or adjudicatory agency. Now, I don't know how many of you know this. I hope none of you made the mistake of going to law school. I did not, but there are courts in our country, federal courts, with the same power as a federal district court, that just hear cases about taxes, just hear cases about trade, on the idea that these are complex subjects and there's a body of precedent that's separate from the general law. And that's what I would like to see. I don't want regulations. I don't want you or Microsoft or Amazon or any other company to have to follow a billion zillion regulations. But I would like a thing where there's a basic law on privacy and security, and there's smart people that will interpret it on a case-by-case basis when it becomes necessary, and there's a body of precedent. So that's my plan. And at the end of the column, I said, hey, if you don't like this plan, come up with your own, but we need a plan. So yeah, if we don't have that, we don't have ambient computing. Nobody's going to want
Big Brother.
Big Brother.
So I'm going to cover one little area, and then I'm going to open up for some questions. But the last area I wanted to talk about was retailing, and in particular, you know, with our sort of heritage as a physical retailer, we're intrigued and interested by the move of pure play people into the physical space now, when people are all saying that malls are dying and shopping in the stores are dying. And you in particular tell me all the time about how your shopping experience is almost exclusively online, with a very few special cases where you will go to the store to get something or to see something that you need, like a TV. But how do you think about the future of retailing, and why would the digital businesses like the Amazons and the Warby Parkers and the Bonabuses move into the physical stores if what you say is that most people are shopping online anyway, the retail mall is dead, and really I'm not completely understanding how I would see their need to go to the physical world if what you say is true. So how do you think about that?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I have to say that I know people who enjoy shopping in physical stores and go shopping. I'm not one of those people. And I used to have to do it, but I have to do it a whole lot less now. And I use Amazon because basically they have everything and I trust them. Everything I buy is an electronics product, or the kind of thing that's in the inventory at Best Buy. I mean, I buy, our dishwasher, this is a great thing. Our dishwasher broke, or I thought it broke, it wasn't cleaning dishes properly, and the plumber comes out and says, when was the last time you ran dishwasher magic through this? And I said, what? Dishwasher what? I've never heard of that. He goes, no, it's a thing, you have to run it. You put it in the silverware basket and you put nothing else in, and you run it through the cycle, and it gets rid of all the crud that's developed over the years on the spray blades or whatever. So what did I do? I pulled out my iPhone while he was standing there. I went to Amazon. I looked up dishwasher magic because I had a certain level of confidence that it's Amazon. They probably sell this thing I've never heard of. Sure enough, there it was, a 3-pack for,
But you had to have a $35 order for them to ship.
Yeah.
No, I did not. I'm Prime. No, I got it like I think this was a Friday. I got it Sunday. Sunday. It was outside my door. I ran the 3 bottles because I'd never run it before, so it needed a lot. And the dishwasher's been much better ever since.
So are retail stores then just for people who see it as a sport or
No,
a hobby?
Well, partly. I think it's not a hobby, but it's something that people do enjoy. I also think there are things, and this goes back even before I met you. I mean, I wrote, and I've always written that you shouldn't buy a laptop online. For instance, when laptops were the big deal, much bigger deal than they are now. You shouldn't buy a laptop online because you need to decide what's the feel of the keyboard. I can say to you, the best keyboards are on the Lenovo laptops, and the IBM for the ThinkPads. I'm not sure that's true of the models that are sold on the shelf at Best Buy. It may be more their B2B models, but they make fabulous keyboards. I can also say to you that the keyboard on the new Mac Pro is nowhere near as good as the keyboard on the MacBook Air. Look at all the and the same goes for the keyboard on the MacBook. And I was briefed on all that by Lenovo and by Apple in either case. So if you're going to buy a laptop that you're going to, particularly now where people keep their laptops 7 or 8 years, you're going to want to go and see how that keyboard feels to you. You can't do that yet online. Maybe in the world of ambient computing, you'll have a haptic tactile thing and you'll be able to do it. So you go to the store. Same with the TV. I mean, I was saying to you, I can think of almost anything I can buy online and feel good about it. I could buy a 55-inch OLED LG TV, which I bought last year online, but I can't see online exactly how it's gonna look, what the picture's gonna look like, what the UI is gonna look like, all that kind of stuff. So I went to Best Buy. that was the last time I was at Best Buy. I'm not here to knock Best Buy. I'm just telling you, I haven't had a need to go to Best Buy, and I buy a lot of electronic stuff.
So
But,
does the experience though of going into the store and seeing the blacker blacks or touching the keyboards, do you think that's enough to get somebody like an Amazon to want to open a store or a Warby Parker to want to open a store?
I don't understand the Amazon stores. I have no idea what they're doing. I have a guess. I think the what do they call it, the grab and go or the go store?
But even at the Amazon
I think that's
bookstores,
basically
right?
an experiment.
What about the highly curated Amazon bookstores?
Yeah, that's an experiment too about data. I can't imagine they think that's gonna move the needle in any discernible way on their sales of books. I just don't.
And Warby Parker again.
Warby Parker's different. That's more like the TV. You wanna
You want the
try,
experience.
you wanna try those glasses on, you wanna see what
But they
look
shipped them
like.
to you before. They used to ship you 5 pairs of glasses before.
Yeah, well, maybe they think there's a certain segment of the population that wants to walk in and see 50 pairs and stand there trying them on.
So take for instance.
My problem is I would go in and see the 50 pairs of glasses, and after the 5 that I would have gotten from Warby Parker anyway, I'm exhausted, and I just give up and buy the 5th.
So take your ambient computing in the home and smart home and think of ambient computing in a store. What could change the experience that might get you to think about the store to be a better place to shop than online? Because again, what you're talking about is a smart store now that maybe uses the big data, right? That exists from being able to track the sensors and being able to see people's smartphone usage. Now I'm in the store, does that create a different reason? Maybe ambient computing plus retailing to be in the store and to get a better shopping experience than you can even get?
So I have kind of 2 examples, or 2 answers to that, one of which is about tech and one of which is not. I still think today in 2018 and for the foreseeable future, the store experience is hugely about human, high touch. I mean, there's an enormous difference walking into a Best Buy and an Apple store. I mean, part of it is the Apple store sells a fraction of the stuff they sell at the Best Buy, and it's very easy for the people there, or much easier for
To know all the
people
products.
to know all the products. And by the way, they train them on their competing. They have people in the stores who know everything about Android and everything about Windows too, which is a big part of the strategy from the beginning. But you know, I don't know about you guys, but when I walk into an Apple store, somebody meets me in a friendly way, asks me
You
what
don't
I'm
think they have your
for.
picture in the back room?
I'm
I'm like, seriously, you don't think that like right next to the coffee maker, there's a picture of Walt Mossberg, especially at the Rockville store or something, that says, when this guy comes in, everybody greet him by name.
I've been in Apple stores all over the world.
I think it's actually probably been on a bulletin.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm not.
Or they
the guy.
rerun your interviews with Steve.
I'll just tell you that those stores are the most profitable stores in the world per square, whatever it is, yard, meter, however the retail industry judges things. And that Fifth Avenue Apple store is more profitable per space than Tiffany's or any other store on Fifth Avenue. And so that doesn't have to do with me and my picture in the paper. Everybody, people said that. You sound like Kara. I mean, that's what Kara says. Kara used to say, you know, that Verizon has a guy in a tree in my backyard, which is why the service is good in my house.
I actually know the T-Mobile guy that used to go to your house when we'd have you do phones. There'd always be somebody in your
Yeah,
area.
but they
who
didn't
say
put a
that.
cow in my yard, you know.
No, but they definitely had somebody going up and down the block.
Kara's idea is there's a guy in a tree with
With
an
the actual-
antenna.
You bet. Small cell.
I don't think so, but, you know, in the Apple store, they immediately want to find out, what can we do for you? They don't try to sell you anything in an obvious way. I mean, and it's probably in a more subtle way, but I can't ever remember them suggesting, you know, you just bought this, why don't you think about buying this other thing? I don't think I've ever had that experience in that store. Because everything they sell is expensive, even if it's even if it's a pair of wired earbuds, it's probably got a very high margin. So I mean, so anyway, I walk into Best Buy. I don't get any of that. I don't even necessarily know where to go in the store. And now the store is not even yours. It's basically.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's contracted out. I mean,
All the vendor labor?
the PC selection and the whole PC section, if I'm correct in what I've read, is run by Microsoft.
Store in the store, store within the store.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, if I go to buy a phone, first of all, I never go to a carrier store. I've just never bought a phone at a carrier store. I mean, I used to go for research, for my columns, but I would never trust personally spending money at a carrier store. I don't believe people are properly trained. Don't think they have my interests even slightly at heart, and I don't think they have the technical capabilities to deal with the phone. So I happen to be an iPhone person, although I do have several Android phones that I've bought with my own money. I bought those, by the way, online. Only Pixels. I buy Pixels. And before that, Nexuses, and I bought those online. So I like to buy a phone from the manufacturer of the phone. Because again, going back to the Soviet ministry thing, I think, I'm happy to buy phone service from Verizon, which is the carrier. Well, I have Verizon, I also have Project Fi. So I buy from a carrier that, but I don't want to buy the phone from them. I want to buy the phone from the people that know all about the phone, who are Google or Apple, in the case of the phones that I pick. If Samsung had, if I really liked Samsung phones, which I never really have, I would go to the store within the store at Best Buy, which is the closest thing to a Samsung store I can think of. If I were going to buy a Windows laptop, I was telling her this, I would go to the Microsoft store. I would not go to Best Buy. I would go to the Microsoft store, where they have selected, I know from hundreds of visits to Microsoft, or not hundreds, but dozens, scores of visits to Microsoft over the years, I know that they have very strong opinions about which of their hardware OEMs are doing a good job and which models.
The curation factor.
They curate the best Windows laptops.
Do you believe they're branded curation because it's showing off their product more than a third-party retailer who would curate for other credentials?
Any of you who ever worked at Microsoft, particularly in the Windows group, or ever been there on a frequent basis, or have friends there, some of you may, this being Seattle, that once you got them talking, if they trusted you, and they did trust me, it was not long before they started just hating on the hardware OEMs for ruining their product in the eyes of consumers, for not, for putting crapware on the laptop, for not doing the DLLs right, for not having the right security. And they actually had a program, I don't know if they still have it, I wrote a whole column about it called Signature.
Yep.
Where, you guys know this?
Yes.
Where they actually re-image whatever it is, an HP, a Dell, a Lenovo, whatever brand it is, they re-image it with a signature image, which is they take away all the crapware on it. They make it, it's like the Pixel Android idea. It's like, here's our best version of Windows delivered to you in a hardware package, which we have optimized to get rid of everything that is causing Windows to not be at its best. So I would definitely go to the Microsoft store for my next Windows laptop. And
So now
and I would go to the Apple store for
So
a
now
Mac.
you're talking about trust and the.
Why would I go to
places
Best
where-
Buy?
Well, but so this is my point. So you're talking about trust, and you trust the curation of Microsoft at their store, and you trust the curation of Apple for third-party products that they merchandise at their store, right?
I do.
The speakers and the headphones that they choose to
Yeah.
carry besides their own brand. So first of all, what kind of experience would you be comfortable then trusting them if they put ambient computing in that experience? Like if they really knew what you were doing in ways that made the next time you walked into that store an easier shopping experience for you? If they actually.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm sorry, that's the other half of the question.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I think it's very hard to answer that generally. I can see the advantage of it, because as someone who doesn't enjoy spending a lot of his time shopping, I used to brag to my wife and to my colleague Katie, who you also know very well, about how little time it took me to buy a suit at Nordstrom's. I was like in and out, and I would go as infrequently as possible. So I would only wear the suits for weddings and funerals, just just like me, and only do it when my wife absolutely forced me to buy a suit. And I hated it. I hated going there. I hated trying the stuff on. I hated the whole thing. So if I could walk in there and they remembered what I bought last time, they're terribly low tech at Nordstrom's. They don't know anything. They don't know anything, really. But if I could walk in to the men's department, and it might be that the men's department is different than the other departments there, but if I could walk in and they could say, oh, this is what you bought last time, let's make sure that you're still the same size, whatever. But we know you like this brand, we know you like this style, we know that you like this color. We can get you in and out of here really quickly because of what we know. I would like that, provided there were proper privacy protections built in. And I don't know that I trust Nordstrom
To be that.
to do the right thing on privacy and security. But if we had a federal law, again, we're the only developed country in the world. You read Google faces big fine, Apple faces big fine, Facebook faces, it's always in Europe, because they have laws in Europe about this. We don't have any of that stuff here. But if Nordstrom had guidelines, because there was a statute, I'm not talking about a regulation, I mean a law passed by Congress, signed by the president, where there was a court that people could say, well, you didn't follow the law, you're stealing my privacy, and the court would make a decision. Eventually, there'd be a lot of guidance, and they would know, okay, we're going to help Walt by knowing all this stuff about him, but this is what we have to do to protect it. This is how we have to handle it, whatever, we have to get his approval, whatever it is. And so I think there's plenty of opportunity there.
Well, there were a lot of questions that I got from people who had a lot of interesting topics they wanted to cover, and I thought maybe we'd just open the last half hour to get some of the questions from you guys out to Walt. That way, I think it makes sure that we cover some of the territory that we didn't cover during the last hour of conversation. So I want to open it up to the floor, and Justin, I'm glad to hear firsthand. Justin's an iOS engineer on our team, and go right ahead. Here you go. Hang on a second, she'll give you the.
Okay,
She's gonna get over
I
there.
have to wait for.
Hang on. There she is.
I've already learned in the short time I've been here that you always wait for Kathy.
That's a good move.
It's very strategic, very
Yes.
strategic.
Basically, as far as I can tell, she's my friend for a decade, but I think Catherine pretty much runs this place.
Go for it, Justin.
Hi, Walt. Thanks for coming. My question is, you brought up Echo and HomePod and the Google one as well. And so Apple, it seems in recent years, has just been refining what others have done. Do you think their time as a disruptive force in the industry is over?
I think that's way too broad. But I do think they have done, like I said, I've been surprised at how successful the Apple Watch has been, but it's not a game changer like the Mac or the iPhone or even the iPod. It just isn't yet. It certainly seems like we had a period where they were ripping off something new and great every few years. Now, it wasn't people. Memories get foggy. They think Steve Jobs did something every year that was amazing and that changed the world. It didn't. If you look at the time gaps between like the iPod and the iPhone, they're considerable. And even between the iPhone and the iPad, which weren't too different, that was a 3-year time gap. But still, it's hard to think of a company that has had a run like that. And they just haven't been doing that lately. I think the most significant thing they have done right now is to, in one fell swoop, take the lead in AR, which, by the way, we didn't talk about it, but I think is enormously important in retailing. I don't know if any of you have seen that IKEA app. AR right now is 2D on the plane of your phone, and Google has a competing thing to Apple's AR kit. But I think Apple has thousands of engineers right now working on this. And by this, I don't mean goggles, I mean literally this. This weight, this thinness, this form, trying to figure out how to get the batteries in, how to get the processor in, and all of that. I think AR is an enormous deal, and I think it's a particularly enormous deal for retail. But if you just look at that IKEA app on the iPhone, you know, it shows you this room, and if you pretend this is, well, it doesn't, you don't have to pretend anything. So this is a room in this office, and you know, Leslie and Catherine and whoever else has any power here decides to furnish this room with stuff from IKEA. It's a questionable decision, but they decided to do it. You can, it will show you the room, and it will show you an IKEA furniture, and it will put it right in this room, and you'll see it right in this room, and it doesn't look cartoony. It looks like the actual couch or whatever, and you can say, oh, I want the smaller one, I want the bigger one, I want the purple one, I want the, you know, gray one, whatever it is. And that's just the baseline start. I mean, they brought ARKit out, and then IKEA app was out in a week or something like that. So, yeah, that's a big deal at Apple. That's what I think. My guess is they're hoping they will become the leaders in augmented reality.
Who's next? Cap. Cap's a product manager.
I'm a product
Okay.
manager on the team. Thanks for coming. What do you think's going on with Facebook in terms of the news feed and studies about negative impact and obviously fake news and Zuckerberg saying he's going to fix all that?
Much time. So, overall, you've all noticed that the shine is off tech in the greater world, the greater population, certainly in Washington, D.C. The suspicion levels have gone way up, and the admiration levels have gone way down. And it's a little bit unfair, and there is an oligopoly, which is a worrisome thing. We talk about that too, of 5 companies that are so big that they snap up any startup that might be a threat to them. And of course, the startup could say no and become a big company and be a threat to them, but typically it's hard to refuse the $3 billion.
Or they could just copy what the startup does and crush them.
Yeah, or, you know, Facebook copies Snapchat, whatever it is. But I think it's a slightly unfair for Microsoft and Apple, who are the older ones and aren't running social networks. There's almost all of these complaints are about social networks and search. And Facebook and Google are not, they are particularly Facebook, but even Google to some extent, are media companies. They won't admit it, they don't want to admit it. They claim they're tech companies. Every company is a tech company. They're really media companies. I mean, 60% of the population gets some of their news, or most of their news, from Facebook. They won't get their hands dirty. They won't curate. They won't even blacklist some of the stuff that they ought to be blacklisting. And one reason, I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, is that, first of all, I think Mark just doesn't, he's so blinded by his belief in the power of algorithms that it's very hard. I know he's recently made statements that finally sound like maybe he'll do something. But I have my doubts. But I also think, you know, there was a law, we talked about it AOL. So in the 90s, one of the very few laws we did have ever passed about tech was passed at the behest of, it's called the Internet Decency Act or something. And there's AOL's lobbyists got a clause put in there that said, companies like ours are just common carriers, and we're not responsible for any of the content that runs on us. You can't sue us. You can't sue us for libel. You can't sue us for defamation. You can't do anything to us. We're just like the common carrier, and they're not. It's bullshit. Facebook actually runs business deals with media companies, the New York Times, Fox Media, where I worked, and they're in the thick of it. But they don't curate, they don't edit, and I think they may have some lawyers telling them, the minute you begin doing too much of this, somebody will say, you've given up, your protection under this common carrier thing. It's a sheer guess on my part. It might be, and it might be something we have to fix in the law. But if you, I'm very critical of Facebook and how it's handled all this.
David. David Williams, also product manager on our team.
So
What do you
we're,
guys product manage? Everything or?
No.
So I specifically do digital advertising on both the app and the website.
Okay.
So my question is, we're in the Seattle Times headquarters building, and just be curious on your take going from the Wall Street Journal to founding Recode. I mean, you hear a lot of stories of bloodletting in the media industry, but you also see a lot of startups in podcasting and independent companies like Recode or GeekWire here in town. Just what are you going to see as the future of that kind of intersection of technology and media?
It's an excellent question. I think it's both inevitable and necessary on the one hand that journalism be digital. It doesn't mean, look, I still get a paper newspaper but I know that I'm in a very small minority. I get more of my
One of the
news
things you like about Jay.
online.
He gets the newspaper.
Yeah, well, he's a great guy.
See.
I mean, we could have a long discussion in which I would tell you that the ability to actually signal the reader as to what are considered by the editors the important stories and which stories join which other stories to help you further understand the topic. It's actually the UI of a paper newspaper is actually superior to anything that's been done on a screen so far. But that train has left the station. Neither of my kids get a paper newspaper, and they never will. So we ought to be digital, and we are digital, and there are storytelling tools that are better in some cases than what paper newspapers have, like video and even silent video with captions that run, and I'm sure you've all watched them in your news feed or somewhere. But it's a highly unstable business right now because people, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, won't pay a subscription fee. And so it depends on advertising. And advertising is, there was an old saying that everybody 20 years ago who worked in this building would have known, because everybody in newspapers knew it, and magazines, which is, some famous department store mogul said, I know that about half of my advertising is effective, I just don't know which half. I mean, there were no metrics, there were no ways to know. We used to do readership studies at the Wall Street Journal a couple times a year, but it was very crude. Now you know exactly what's going on, and so the legs can be cut out from under you at any time by these advertising companies. Secondly, Facebook and Google together are sucking up 65–70% of all the advertising dollars online. So if you're the Seattle Times and you're online, you're just disadvantaged by that, and you're at the mercy of Facebook. And when Facebook announces, which they did, that they're going to suppress branded posts like the ones the Seattle Times or Best Buy puts up, and try to increase the visibility of, here's my new baby, which is fine. I like seeing those too. It's, at first glance you say, well, that's good because that'll make it harder for the fake news people. But it won't really, because what happens is you'll share to me something that you think is important or sensational and fits what you know to be our joint political point of view, whatever it is, and it's completely fake, but you don't know that. And I say, well, he's my friend, he's smart, so this is probably true. And then I pass it on to somebody else, but the whole chain of it is just furthering some completely fake or highly biased piece of news in quotes. And Facebook isn't going to stop that, it's actually going to promote it because it's us personally engaging. Meanwhile, the Seattle Times, which is trying its best, I assume it's trying its best to do a true true factual thing or a smart opinion column or something is going to be harder to find. And their financial legs are going to be cut out from it even more, so it's very difficult.
I'm gonna just make sure we're fair. It's odd, but it's all product people. I'm gonna go to our recruiting guy, just to vary a little bit.
Got it, not a product person.
Yeah, and also just because we have a product roundtable, so any questions we don't get, we can pick up in the product
Okay,
roundtable.
got it.
Thanks for coming. You spoke a little bit about the smart house, and then you spoke about stuff that's 10 years out and things like that. What about the short-term stuff? Like, how do we fix that smart home problem where, I have an Apple and an Android and, off-market something in my home, and I want it all to talk together and do something else that I think is cool?
The only way that I can think of to fix it is for somebody, and it could be one of the established people like Google or Apple, it could be a new company, it could be, I don't know if Best Buy wanted to do it, maybe it could be Best Buy. Lowe's tried it. If you want to talk about retailers, they tried it, I don't know, 5 years ago, or something like that. The only way to solve it is for somebody, one of those kinds of people, somebody to say, here's a complete line, we've made it all talk to each other, we've made it all absolutely seamless. It's like, look, nobody's perfect, but if you if you have a Mac, and you have an iPhone, you have an iPad, and you get a phone call, if you toggle the options, you get a phone call or you get a text, it's gonna come in on whichever one you have. And they all talk to each other, they all work. They have that handoff thing. Microsoft has something sort of similar, except they don't have phones anymore. So that's a big advantage because they all talk to each other on a small scale. This is a much harder problem. The home is a much harder problem. But that's what you need. You need no less than that. You need it all to talk to each other, to all be aware of each other in the short term, before we get to ambient computing, is I think what you're asking me about. So the, Nest has tried it, what do they call it, Thread? They have a system. My friend Alex at Smart Things, he had a system. Everybody has a system. Nobody's system has been powerful enough or worked or incorporated enough of the things consumers want. Made it simple to set it all up. You should be able, I'm not kidding about this, you should be able to open the box, put the thing into the socket or wherever it has to go, screw the bulb in, whatever it is, and that's it. It just instantly picks up the hub or the software you have installed somewhere, and it's like a router. Maybe it isn't built into your router. Maybe that's the solution. Some new functionality built into routers, but it should just work. If that happened, then we have smart homes in the short term. Anything short of that, I think it's still be a hot mess.
So we'll take one last question. John, I know you had your hand up for a while, so wait for the mic there. Take the mic.
Hi, John.
Sorry, I'm another product person.
No, I love product people.
Excellent. Someone we're talking about, I'll explain where this comes from maybe at a later date. YouTube has changed their revenue model such that they're basically cutting off the long tail. They're basically saying you now have to have
4,000.
You have to have 4,000 subscribers and 1,000 hours or the inverse of that, which in theory is going to cut off the long tail stuff. And we've been looking at a lot of DIY content, a lot of UGC, user-based content. And a lot of those people are going to are going to reduce their interest in making these videos. Do you see, and I don't see Vimeo coming up as a competitor to them in any realistic way. Do you see them continuing to just go that direction and being able to support it, and thus cutting off the long tail? We have a choice, or do you see a competitor, or do you think that they will get regulated in some way? How is all that?
No, I think that's a business decision. It may not be one we like, but that's a business decision. I can't imagine the government, even under my scheme, somebody going to one of these courts and succeeding in saying, oh, well, you just made a choice that they didn't, by the way, their decision doesn't say you can't make those how-tos, put them on their service. So it's not a free speech thing. It's not even a curation thing. They're letting them on there. They're just saying you can't be in our ad program. And I understand that it may amount to the same thing as what you're saying, but I can't imagine any outside force would stop them for doing that. I think it's an opportunity for you. If you're thinking of doing how-to things as part of the overall Best Buy customer experience, maybe you already do, and I'm sorry if I missed that, but if you're thinking of doing that, hire a bunch of these people and aggregate them so they get 25,000, views or whatever it is that clears the bar easily, and rebrand it Best Buy. I don't know, it looks to me like an opportunity for you. But I feel bad for some of these people, but I come out of a world where even before the internet, you either had a big circulation or you didn't. You either had credibility or a following or you didn't. I developed a following as a columnist. It was a risk. I took a risk. I invented this column. There were many editors at the Wall Street Journal who didn't think I should have this column. They didn't think technology was important. They didn't want opinionated reviews in the column, in the paper, even though it was demarcated as an opinion column. They were wrong. But what I said to them in the early days was, let me try this for 6 months, the way I want to try it. And if it fails, doesn't attract a following, I'll go back to being a beat reporter and you can cancel the column. How about that deal? So, I stepped out there and took a risk in the market, and some of these people doing these how-tos, maybe there's just a glut of them. I don't know. But that's the market.
On that note, I want to say thanks on behalf of everybody in this room. I think that the opportunity to get time with you today and to get out of our task-based day-to-day work, it has been really inspiring for me. I always find our conversations to be mind-expanding and helpful. I hope everybody here did as well, and join me in thanking them for spending
I don't know if you were ordered to attend this, but if you're not, thank you for taking time out of your day. I know you all have important work to do, and you're all smart, and I would also like to say that I've learned as much from her as she's ever learned from me. So, and I love coming to places like this and talking to people like you. So, thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, everybody.